Order. Irene Campbell to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered E-petition 700317 relating to bovine TB and culling badgers. It is a privilege to serve under your chairship, Mr Stewart. The petition is titled End the Badger Cull and Adopt Other Approaches to Bovine TB Control, and it was created by Robert Pownall, founder of the group Protect the Wild, and it has reached over 102,000 signatures, which is a great achievement. The petition states the government's TB eradication strategy allows the continued killing of badgers, a protected species, until the end of this Parliament, despite the Labour manifesto calling the cull ineffective. It further states we believe the badger cull is unjustified and must end. We call for an immediate end to the cull and the implementation of cattle-focused measures to control bovine TB, rather than what we see as scapegoating wildlife. It's important to note that badgers have been part of the British Isles for at least 250,000 years, and their presence is integral to maintaining our ecosystem balance. Bovine tuberculosis, or BTB, has had a terrible impact on the English countryside, wildlife and farmers. In the past 10 years, 278,000 infected cattle have been ordered to be slaughtered, and over 230,000 badgers have been culled. In relation to the food chain, I was surprised to learn that culled cows found to have one visible lesion can actually enter the food chain if the lesion area is removed. Those with 2 or more lesions are deemed unsafe and unable to enter the food chain. Farmers receive compensation for these slaughtered cattle, and in 2024, almost £23 million was paid out in compensation for slaughtered cattle. I'd like to add a side note here and suggest that this may be something to consider in any future food labelling schemes or policies, as I'm sure many consumers would like to know if they're eating a cow which has had tuberculosis. On the 30th of August 2024, the Government announced the start of work on their new strategy to tackle bovine tuberculosis and a goal of achieving officially bovine tuberculosis-free status for England by 2038. And I look forward to hearing more about this from the Minister today. To achieve bovine tuberculosis-free status, one way forward is the increase of vaccination. The Government said in their response that the development of a cattle vaccine is at the forefront of their solutions. The field trials of the cattle BCG vaccine and the companion test to detect infected among vaccinating animals, often called the DIVA test, have been ongoing since June 2021. The Government also plans to establish a new badger vaccinator field force to increase the rollout and coverage of badger vaccination, hand in hand with a badger vaccination study to analyse the effect of badger vaccination on the incidence of TB in cattle. However, it's important to note that it is the petitioner's view that vaccinating badgers is not the way forward, as the petitioner believes that this continues to push the belief that badgers are responsible for the spread of bovine TB, and advises that this is not the case, and there is scientific evidence that backs this up, and we'll hear more about this during this opening statement, such as that of Professor Mark Brewer. However, other groups like Wildlife and Countryside Link believe that badger vaccination is a useful tool for replacing badger culling. Their opinion is that since studies show the majority of infection is cattle to cattle, some cattle to badger, and very small minority is badger to cattle, the focus should be cattle-based, whether that be testing or vaccination, with badger vaccinations being a supplementary tool. The Badger Trust found that 94% of cases are spread cow to cow, and that more cattle have been slaughtered in 2021 than in 2013, when the most recent cull started. Vaccinated badgers are also likely to be culled at times. Biosecurity is a fundamental approach to tackling bovine TB. However, a survey of farmers carried out by the Trust indicated that farm biosecurity was not widely employed by the survey respondents. So with that in mind, the next steps forward could focus heavily on enhancing biosecurity. In fact, the updated Godfrey report, a bovine TB strategy review, concluded that As a decision has been made to phase out culling, it is of great importance to develop effective non-lethal interventions to enable eradication, such as vaccination of badgers or reducing contact between badgers and cattle. It went on to say, an unfortunate consequence of the controversy around badger culling and the politicisation of the debate has been a deflection of focus from what can be done by the individual farmer and by the livestock industry to help control the disease. In particular, the poor take-up of on-farm biosecurity measures and the extent of trading in often high-risk cattle is severely hampering disease control measures. Some of these biosecurity measures include timely testing of cattle to reduce risk from cattle movement and using multiple forms of testing, combining sensitivity and specificity. Practising good husbandry should also be encouraged, for example, maintaining robust perimeter boundaries, using double fencing and avoiding common grazing and shared water courses. So as a Scottish MP, I note that Scotland has had officially tuberculosis-free status since 2009 and stopped badger culling in 2012. The Scottish Wildlife Trust stated that the decision to begin mass badger culling was made despite the results of the randomised badger culling trial between 1998 and 2005, which concluded that badger culling can make no meaningful contribution to cattle TB control in Britain. The study found that reactive badger culling badgers on and around farms with outbreaks of bovine TB could actually increase incidences of bovine TB due to badgers that survive culling roaming beyond their usual range and therefore spreading bovine TB further. Similarly, in Wales, culling stopped in 2021 to focus on cattle and transmission routes instead. A study published in Vet Record Analysis of the impact of badger culling on bovine tuberculosis in cattle in the high-risk area of England claims that during the same period as this study, Wales achieved similar reductions in herd bovine TB incidence as England through the introduction of improved bovine TB testing and other cattle measures and without widespread badger culling. This suggests that bovine TB in cattle can indeed be controlled through cattle measures alone, as was predicted by the independent scientific group in 2007. In 2022, the European Health and Digital Executive Agency found that 17 countries in Europe were designated bovine TB free, yet only 3 countries use licensed culling of wildlife: England and Ireland and some parts of France. Many are of the view that badgers are not the primary cause of the spread of bovine TB, and the cull of them is a cruel and ineffective way to tackle this disease. With all of the aforementioned evidence, it is only fair to ask the government to stop issuing new licences for culls and instead focus on non-lethal intervention and indeed consider removing all of... Yeah, I will give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I differ slightly in my view. Certainly we don't want to see badgers culled unnecessarily, but the evidence shows that a badger cull does have an impact, a sustained badger cull does have an impact in reducing TB. And if I look at Northern Ireland, which hasn't had a badger cull, our costs are soaring to over 100 million this year in compensation for TB. If you look at the reports from Somerset and Gloucestershire, there's a reduction of 50% of TB because of the badger cull. So would she agree with me that vaccination is good in theory, and I want to get to that point, but in the first instance you need the cull to try and get control of it, and certainly no one wants to see a badger die from TB because it's quite horrendous.
I thank the honourable member for her intervention, but I have to say I disagree with what you've said. I think the evidence is there for the badger cull to end immediately. And as I said, I thank you for your intervention, but disagree with what you said. I will.
Scientific evidence for culling having been effective, and certainly the figure of 56% is often referred to in some of the scientific papers, but when we dug down into the detail of those scientific papers, actually it became less clear because there was a variation in the testing regimes which were being applied through the period when that apparent reduction was being detected. So it wasn't clear at all. I mean, certainly, there's a lot of science out there, but none of it is as clear as the Honourable Lady is purporting. Thank you.
note your comments. I still will disagree with what the Honourable Lady said. So bovine TB in cattle can indeed be controlled through cattle measures alone, as was predicted by the independent scientific group in 2007. Many are of the view that badgers are not the primary cause of the spread of bovine TB, and the cull of them is a cruel and ineffective way to tackle this disease. With all of the aforementioned evidence, it is only fair to ask the Government to stop issuing new licences for culls and instead focus on non-lethal... Yes, I will give way.
I thank the member for giving way and for outlining the argument so well. Badger culling has proved to be ineffective, unscientific and inhumane. Does she agree with me that we shouldn't see an increase or supplementary calls on culling in no-risk areas or the extension of any current licences?
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I fully agree with all of her comments. Thank you. So it is time to catch up to other countries with lower rates of bovine TB and focus on similar biosecurity measures rather than cruel culls which kill hundreds of thousands of badgers as well as hundreds of thousands of cows. We know from the rates of bovine TB in England that our current strategy is not working, and targeting animals which make up for the least number of transmissions cannot be the way forward. What is important for everyone here is that bovine tuberculosis is effectively tackled. Farmers are losing money, the government is losing money, and cows and badgers are unnecessarily dying. New TB herd incidents have only fallen by 1% since the badger cull restarted in 2013, and innocent animals are continuing to die, whilst nothing is improving. So undoubtedly there should be more bovine testing, and areas such as the development of the bovine vaccine and increased rollout of badger vaccination must be considered. In addition, there could be incentives for farmers taking part in these schemes, as well as adopting enhanced biosecurity. The previous government encouraged fear-mongering around the role of badgers in spreading the disease, and I encourage this government not to make the same mistakes. Farmers must be supported throughout the strategy and transition to new methods. If the next strategy is poorly implemented, we risk calls for badger culling to return. The Government has said in their response to this petition, existing cull processes will be honoured to ensure clarity for farmers involved in these culls, whilst new measures can be rolled out. However, the Government has decided that it will not be proceeding with the proposals drawn up under the previous Government relating to targeted badger culling. So in light of the evidence today, I ask the Government to review and cancel all existing cull licences, such as the ones that Natural England set earlier this year. I look forward to hearing the Minister's response today on how a Labour government will tackle bovine TB, and as a Labour MP, I urge that we follow our manifesto commitment to end the badger cull.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 700317 relating to bovine tuberculosis control and badger culling. And I call upon Sarah Dyke.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. It's an honour to serve with you in the chair this afternoon and speak on this important debate. And I'd like to thank all of the petitioners, including the 321 from Glastonbury and Somerton. Growing up on a dairy and beef farm, I'm all too aware of the devastating impact that TB is capable of unleashing. And I also recently attended the Dairy Industry Dinner and the Dairy Show, both held at the Royal Bath and West Showground, just outside my constituency, where I met with dairy farmers from all over the country. And speaking to farmers there, I was once again reminded of the emotional trauma they experience when they are told that they have reactors in their herd. Farmers rear their animals with exceptional care and are proud to uphold high welfare standards. So when an outbreak occurs, it's the worst news that they can receive. But of course, farming is also a business. And alongside the emotional impact, there is also the financial impact as well. Mr. Stewart, currently farmers receive around £2,000 compensation for slaughtered cows, but this does not account for the business costs. A family farm in South Barrow, in my constituency, had been TB-free for over 50 years, but a recent suspected case in an animal brought in from a market forced their temporary closure. They told me that the rules as they stand are not fit for purpose and fail to adapt for different farming practices. Yes, of course I will.
I'm very grateful, and it sounds a little bit like a case that I have in the area that I represent, where Rachel and Andrew Webber had TB found and then introduced an additional 11 cows, and DEFRA said that they would only be compensated 50% of the cost of those cows, given that they were introduced after an ongoing TB outbreak was found. Does she think that DEFRA ought to be paying 100% compensation for those losses?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I wholeheartedly agree. The financial burden, but the emotional burden on farmers is devastating. And we know the pressures that our farmers are under already with the inheritance tax, the recent withdrawal of SFI, the countryside stewardship coming to the end of this year. Farmers are, many of them are on the brink, and TB, as we know, really leads many to close their farm gates for the very last time. So proper compensation is absolutely crucial. If I can go on to the current testing system, Mr. Stewart, the current system is failing animals and it is failing our farmers. Too many infected animals slip through undetected, while many farmers lose clean stock completely unnecessarily. All the while, taxpayer spends nearly £30 million per year on compensation alone to its farmers, to our UK farmers. But in total, the cost of TB is estimated to be well over £100 million per year to the public purse. Now, I recently visited Gatcombe Farm in my honourable friend's constituency of Honiton and Sidmouth. The TB eradication project there is being led by the farmer Robert Reed and his vet Dick Sibley. The research carried out over the last 10 years raises important questions for the Minister about how we should solve this problem. Their work has shown that undetected infection in cattle is the main driver of transmission, and that current skin testing methods has serious flaws. Some cows pass the test 30 times over, but they fail under more advanced blood or faeces tests. But currently, enhanced testing is illegal in ODF herds, despite the fact that it's this failure to detect TB and the lack of trust in the system that is causing so many of the issues. Yes, of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. A farmer in my constituency of South Devon has engaged in some of the methods suggested by Dick Sibley at Gatcombe and made practical changes to prevent the risk of TB spreading amongst her herd. After years and years of positive tests and the brutal effect on her and her family's mental health of losing much-loved pedigree animals, this approach did appear to have the desired effect. However, it took a great deal of time and commitment for her to carry out the research needed to better understand the biosecurity and how to manage the herd, time which many farmers simply don't have. So would the honourable member agree with me that better advice and engagement with farmers would help to ensure that they have the required resources to understand alternative ways to prevent the spread within a herd?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and I absolutely agree. Education is absolutely critical to this, but also to allow that research to continue to happen. Of course, funding is required to be able to do that, but we also need the right capital investment into farms as well, for them to carry out the right type of herd management that is required to help to stop the transmission of bovine TB. Thank you for that intervention. And that's why, yes, of course, I'll give way.
Does she agree with me that it will seem counterintuitive to the public that new testing is illegal and would require Secretary of State intervention, and that testing in herds that are considered not to have TB is therefore not possible, which is allowing these undetected cows to be left in herds?
I thank the honourable for her intervention. If I understand her correctly, I think she's saying that that detection is really important at any stage, and if so, then I do agree with her. I think it's absolute ludicrousy that we can't continue to test all animals within a herd. But, Mr Stewart, the Liberal Democrats are calling on the government to develop safe, effective, humane and evidence-based ways of controlling TB. We must invest to produce workable vaccines and surveillance measures that minimises harm to badgers and cattle. The previous farming minister had undertaken a visit to Gatcombe Farm alongside the current head of the NFU, and to his credit, I understand that he had shown intent to this issue. So I urge the current minister to follow in his footsteps, and I'd also like to urge the minister for an update on whether she will be implementing the recommendations from the Godfrey report. The UK lags behind others in tackling TB, with prevalence still at around 8% of cattle, despite the culling of nearly 250,000 badgers since 2013. And so, Mr Stewart, we must look beyond culling and focus on testing of cattle while investing in further research into badger vaccination. I'd also like to see data sharing improved, especially providing farmers with access to their TB testing data alongside relevant supplementary tests, whilst ensuring that governmental agencies like the E-petition and BCMS actually talk to each other. British farming is at a crossroads, and this government must stand up and support our farmers. And that's why the Liberal Democrats want to see an extra £1 billion boost to the farming budget, because this would help farmers with the capital investment to support herd management, biosecurity, and help break the transmission routes of tuberculosis in cattle. But trust is difficult to build, and unfortunately DEFRA are not conveying confidence to the industry right now. Farmers are still waiting on the next iteration of SFI, despite promises it would come by the end of the summer. We cannot continue to kill our way out of the TB crisis. Solutions must be found to keep our beef and dairy herds ODF. To safeguard the long-term future of British farming, industry and government must work together to ensure we reach the target of eliminating TB by 2038. Thank you.
At Eccles.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today, and it is a privilege to speak on this important debate. And I pay tribute to those who've signed a petition, all the campaigners, experts and local groups who continue to fight for evidence-based policy on bovine tuberculosis and badger culling. I do not support the continuation of the badger cull. The evidence that it works is at best deeply flawed and at worst deliberately ignored. In June this year, Sir Brian May and vet Dick Sibley from the Save Me Trust visited Parliament to highlight the science. He showed us, as have many independent scientists, that the link between badgers and the spread of bovine TB has been overstated and misrepresented for years. There are some crucial facts that often get ignored. The government itself recognised in a previous debate that slurry spreading is a major cause of bovine TB transmission. Yet instead of tackling that head-on, we persist with killing badgers. It has been more than a decade since general testing of all animals was undertaken. The last large-scale testing found that sheep, deer and alpacas showed far higher incidence of bovine TB than badgers. Sheep at about 28%, deer at 22%, and alpacas topping that at 30%. Badgers, however, came in at only around 7%. And that really matters, because even in areas with no badgers present, bovine TB persists, and yet we continue to scapegoat this single species. The science also tells us that badgers only become fully infectious with tuberculosis after about 5 years, but the average lifespan of a badger in the wild is 3 to 4 years. Those badgers which are killed are often too young to have developed TB. It simply doesn't add up. Less than 1 in 10 badgers tests positive for TB. And as one campaigner put it to me, TB is primarily spread by aerosol. So I put it to my colleagues of more rural constituencies, when was the last time you saw a badger sneeze on a cow? The economics of this policy are just as indefensible. Policing the cull costs over £1 million per zone, and the official badger cull trials cost millions, and the results were then ignored. Meanwhile, alternative methods such as the GATCOM strategy or improved skin testing offer more effective, humane and cost-effective options. And let us not overlook the perverse incentives in the current system. Farmers are compensated far more for TB-affected cattle than they would receive by selling the animals at market. That does not drive good practice, nor does it support the long-term health of the herd. A fairer and more robust approach would be regular MOT-style health checks for farms. Stronger badger culling is not the answer. It is scientifically unsound, economically wasteful and morally wrong. We should be investing in real solutions, biosecurity, testing, farm management and ending practices such as slurry spreading on grazing fields. I'm pleased that the government is working towards a new national strategy to bring down bovine TB, and I'm proud to be part of a party which has a manifesto pledge to end the badger cull by the end of this Parliament. And whilst a focus on non-lethal culls for badgers is a definite improvement to the status quo, I urge the new strategy to take into account new science and evidence which calls into question the link between badgers and livestock. It is time we stopped this failed and cruel policy and focused instead on tackling bovine tuberculosis at its true sources. And let's not wait to the end of this Parliament to do the right thing. Let's end this barbaric practice now.
As the Chair, and I congratulate the 102,000 plus petitioners for signing the petition, 185 for my own constituency, and I join them in opposing the badger cull. And I am so glad that it is this Labour government which is looking at the evidence, at the science, in order to support farmers, the whole community, and of course badgers, with of course, better biosecurity testing and, if necessary, vaccination, as we've heard already in this debate. I've been debating the issue of the badger cull since I was the Shadow Environment Secretary, and at that time pored over the science and came to the very clear conclusion that the badger cull was not the way forward. We needed to cull the cull and ultimately put in the right measures. But I'm so glad since that point, when just Gloucestershire and Somerset were involved in the culling experiment, that further science has been developed. Today we know that around 250,000 badgers have been killed, around half the population of badgers, and in some areas that amounts to about 70% of the population of badgers. Badgers now becoming an endangered species in our country. They're crudely killed, and of course many of them not carrying the TB virus at all, and indeed placing increased risk on farmers and their cattle. And as we've already heard, 94% of transmission of bovine TB is from cow to cow, but the poor badger is being scapegoated in this process. It is present across our environment, and we've heard many examples of that already in this debate. And it's recognised that, of course, farmers and government want to stop the spread of this disease, and we need to by following the right methodology. And in order to facilitate that, taking the money which is being spent on the cull and ensuring that that can go to farmers, and indeed additional support to ensure that we get on top of this. Bovine TB, as with human TB and other communicative diseases, follows the same pattern. We need testing, isolation of the disease, and where necessary, vaccination. We need only think about COVID to know the effects which were recommended to us, to know that those same methodologies need to be applied when we're looking at TB in cattle. And of course, controlling the movement of cattle and more rigorous testing with the right testing can make such a difference to livestock to stop cross-infection between herds. So this is all about good public health, which we are so familiar with. Worldwide we practice that, so why be different with this community? It is seriously letting farmers down and scapegoating and slaughtering badgers, not aiding farmers in
their management of the disease. The culling itself has been condemned to be inhumane. Of a badger shot while free roaming, up to 22.8% of badgers were still alive after 5 minutes of being shot. This demonstrating significant levels of suffering, yet monitoring of culling is at an all-time low. But it is the evidence that should make government determine that the cull is the wrong measure. And Professor Rosie Woodruff's research, dating back to 2007, demonstrated the ineffectiveness of the badger cull because of the way that TB is transmitted. And she has described it as the largest manipulative ecological experiment ever conducted. If anything, the risk of transmission from cattle to badger is far higher than the converse. But consistent research by DEFRA shows that the culling has no impact on bovine TB, and yet culling continues. Asking a question to the former Secretary of State now, before the summer recess, I was told that Labour are now serious at looking at the science, and I welcome this. However, the cull has continued for 2 seasons under our watch, and therefore it's really important that we bring this to an end. I too met with Gatcombe Farm and their team when they came to Parliament before the summer, the farmer and the vet, who I deeply probed for about an hour to really understand the science and the methodology. I spent time listening to the impact that this had and how this farm, once ridden with TB, was now free of bovine TB. Surely this is the outcome we want for all of our farmers. We've got to look at the testing regime. The traditional skin test will only show a presence of the disease when sufficiently loaded with reactor cells. By this point, the cow could have advanced TB in its lungs for some time and managed to spread the disease to other cattle. A more advanced screening, PCR tests, can identify the disease at a far earlier stage, and therefore to deploy this is a better approach. And we all know you can scale PCR testing as we did over the COVID pandemic. Research at Gatcombe and recognised elsewhere showed the accumulation of slurry also led to a concentration of disease. Untreated and infested, the slurry is spread onto fields. It is then ingested by snails and slugs and other animals, and then into the badger food chain. So the risk of cattle to badger infection is incredibly strong. So PCR testing has proved this point as well. Further research has shown that the intensification of farming increases the risk. Cattle wading through its own feces and that of other cattle means that there is a greater risk of cross-infection compared to cattle grazing in the open, which is far less likely as they will eat the grass in between the cowpats. While often we think about TB as purely a respiratory disease, of course we see those lesions in other organs as well. So it's now recognised that farm intensification and poor hygiene, again, a basic that we learnt through COVID, is the root of the disease transmission, and that good biosecurity and testing and removal of the removal of the cattle is the way to address this. Something, again, we practiced in COVID. So the Gatcombe strategy, it works and should be adopted. The question, therefore, is not what should be done, but how. And how will that be supported by government? Using that sensitive testing to identify the pathogens in the faeces and blood, cut off the route of infection, identify the disease before the cattle becomes infectious, scrupulous hygiene, and removal of faeces at pace, and testing new cattle before integrating with existing livestock with a more sensitive actiphage test. So the TB-infested farm has become a TB-free farm, all without killing a single badger and just removing the infected cattle. No badger vaccination needed. In fact, through this time, it was proven that it was the cattle where it's most intensely farmed that is providing the greatest risk of infection, those not free to graze. An infected cow will produce around 500 times more faeces than that of a badger, whereas badger hygiene is known to be far more fastidious, and they are likely to concentrate this in one area. Therefore, the risk of badger to cattle infection is so minuscule. It is the other way round. Other studies have shown that badgers do not approach cattle, so airborne infection through a badger breathing on a cow is so unlikely as ever it is encountered. I'm happy to.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I keep hearing member after member talking about badgers sneezing on cows and badgers breathing on cows. Badgers can spread bovine TB to cattle through urine droppings. I just wanted to make that point, and also that bovine TB costs this country £150 million a year, and yet the government at the moment have only invested £40 million. So I really would urge the member to agree with me, and also the Minister listening, to significantly increase that investment to make sure we can have that effective vaccine rollout that we keep hearing about.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to understand the scale, the point I was making, of the deposits from a cow, from cattle, where they are wading in their faeces, compared to that of a badger, which has far more fastidious hygiene regimes. So the risk of infection is very much reduced. However, if we weren't putting the faeces from cows into the food chain of a badger, then a badger's faeces would be TB free. So I think the science will speak to that. So we should stop putting that slurry untreated on our fields, and therefore taking the TB out of the badger's food chain as well. There are two steps that now need focus. One is allowing the testing of herds to show that it's free of infection before it becomes infectious. So we need to do that early, routinely, and assuredly with the right testing, and I think that is for government to scale. And then we need to make sure that we are able to treat that slurry before it is placed on our fields, and anaerobic digestion is one such solution. So let's stop the cull, let's engage better with that testing and control the movements, and of course put in place the biosecurity measures which will make such improvement. And as always, with all communicable diseases, ensure high levels of hygiene. It is the basics of public health and should be applied here. Above all, we know it works. It benefits farmers, it reduces their stress and anxiety, and ultimately it will save not only cattle and farms, but also the badger.
Perrin Moon.
Whereas, thank you, Mr. Stewart, and it's a rare honour to serve under your chairship. I am particularly pleased to... Just check the microphone's working. I'm particularly pleased to speak in this debate as others have noted the petition titled, and I quote, "Ban the badger cull and adopt other approaches to bovine TB control," received at the final count 102,498 signatures. Of those, 389 came from my constituents in Campbell, Redruth and Hale, which is the 5th highest across all parliamentary constituencies, and I will join them to make it 390. It's also worth noting that many of the constituencies with the highest number of signatures are located in Cornwall, and I note that half of Cornwall's representatives are represented here today, the southwest of England and Wales, where this issue is particularly resonant. As has already been pointed out, bovine tuberculosis is a chronic infectious disease that primarily affects cattle, and it's caused by bacterium Mycobacterium bovis, which can be spread to humans, meaning it has both livestock and public health implications. I'm proud that so many of my constituents have expressed concern about this issue. Their engagement reflects the fact that Cornwall and the southwest of England are considered high-risk areas for bovine TB, according to the Badger Trust. I'd like to make clear to the Minister the strength of feeling amongst my constituents whilst a few of us, perhaps none of us, can claim to be experts on bovine TB, we can all understand the impact this disease has on cattle farming and the deep sadness many feel about the culling of badgers, which are the largest remaining carnivore in Britain. At a time of renewed interest in protecting our natural environment, including efforts to rewild parts of the UK and reintroduce species such as the beaver in parts of Cornwall, this debate is especially important. I do welcome the government's commitment to a step change in tackling this devastating disease and its progress towards vaccinating badgers to support healthier populations. But I would like to ask the Minister whether she agrees that the aim of government policy in this area must be to preserve our wildlife, including badgers, which play such an important role in our ecosystem, whilst also protecting our farming communities, which are so vital to the nation. Thank you.
Andrew George.
Thank you, Mr Stewart, and well, Moresta, Purda, to my honourable friend, neighbour in Campbell and Redruth and Hale. And indeed, if we're being boastful about the numbers of people who are supporting this particular petition, then the St Ives constituency, which is West Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, came first with 470 signatures in support. So I think it's worthwhile just making sure we pause for a moment and respect the constituency for having achieved that figure. But having said that, I don't want to make light of the issue itself, because after all, the honourable member for Somerton and Frome and my honourable friend next door has rightly, and others have rightly, drawn attention to. I mean, this is a matter of deep emotion to all people, but especially to farmers who have been very deeply affected, and there are many in my constituency who are when they get a reactor and they're closed down, they lose cattle. It does have a very significant emotional impact on that family and indeed on the viability of the holding, and that's something which I don't think we should be dismissing or ignoring in this debate. And as I'm someone who's been involved in this debate over many years, I was a member of the Agriculture Select Committee back in 1997, just to show my age, and that was the start of the randomised badger controlled trials at that stage, where the independent scientific group oversaw triplets of cull, proactive cull, reactive cull, and no action, and my constituency was included in that at the time, and I was a strong supporter of it and ran the gauntlet of a lot of kind of animal rights campaigners at the time supporting a cull in the area, because I believe that when you're establishing any kind of policy, you base it on sound science, and you can't simply conjecture. And that independent scientific group research at the time provided a lot of baseline evidence against which we've been able to track and compare data over many years, and that's really, really important. It wasn't because I wanted to see badgers culled. It wasn't because I felt that they were guilty. It was on the basis that we needed to get the evidence, and it was the only way of getting the evidence at the time, to actually base policy on evidence-based policy and sound science. I know that since that time, there's been a lot further iterations in the way in which the policy has developed. And I also remember back sometime later, of course, in 2014, when the current, being brought to a close now by the government, I think rightly so, of proactive culling within particularly hotspot areas was being brought forward, and certainly the debates in the Commons then were sharply divided between. I think they even referred to themselves as Team Farmer and Team Badger, and I was at the time saying, well, what about team science? You know, we need to base this policy on the evidence. And I also remember, some will remember the then Secretary of State, the Honourable Member for Oswestry, describing or accusing badgers of shifting the goalposts at the time, which caused a great deal of mirth. And we had a lot of fun. I'm sorry to say, at his expense on that occasion. But it is really important that the government does look at the science and looks very carefully at the science as it goes forward. I think it's coming to the right conclusion, by the way, just to preempt what I'm going to say at the very end of my comments. But so I welcome the approach which they appear to be taking, because although people have referred to you know, whether the badgers are in some way involved in the spread of bovine TB. And I think it's reasonable to say that the science indicates that the badgers are involved in the spread of bovine TB. But I would argue, and I think the evidence appears to be, that it's to a lesser extent than cattle-to-cattle transmission. And indeed, there was a paper published in 2021 by Cambridge University Molecular Genetics Department, Van Tonder et al. In 2021, demonstrating that there was a prevalence of 17 times greater likelihood of the spread of bovine TB between cattle than from the origin of badgers on the basis of the studies which they have undertaken. And certainly, whole genome. I'll be interested in the Minister's response to this, because I imagine that the Minister and the Minister's scientists have been looking very closely at the whole genome sequencing which has been undertaken, where you can actually identify the source of the bovine TB, not just that there is a reactor, but you can actually trace the sequencing process itself, that actually that and the work of Cambridge University is actually indicating where the origins of that infection actually originate. And I think it's really important to understand that when one is coming to conclusions in this respect. And indeed, while we were debating the matter in 2014, I was then talking to Professor Rosie Woodruff of the Zoological Society of London, who was very much involved in the randomised badger control trials and indeed other work, and I think it advises the government, I think, on their partnership group. And we were looking at a community-led, the first community-led badger vaccination project, working with farmers in the constituency. From then, and I have to say that the Zoological Society of London did some great work at the time. We did recruit a lot of support amongst the community of people who would be supporting. They weren't vaccinators themselves, although some wished to undertake the training to become vaccinators. And certainly that was the start of the first project where the community went out or offered to go out to support our farmers in providing the first effort to roll out a vaccination project in the Penwith area, which is the Land's End area to those who don't know my constituency too well. And unfortunately, although I in 2015 had to start a sabbatical from the House of Commons at that stage, and therefore wasn't able to follow it as closely as I'd like to have done as the Member of Parliament. And of course, there was then a worldwide shortage of BCG, so projects like that were unable to proceed for 2 years because of the lack of vaccine available. Nevertheless, the work of the Zoological Society of London did continue across both Penwith, in the St Austell area and indeed in the Helston area, and is now rolling out further work elsewhere in Cornwall, and has actually demonstrated as a result of a paper which they published in August last year in People and Nature, which I've saved to my old friend, the member for Campbell and Redruth, that it's got its abstract in Kernuic, in Cornish, which is a first, was demonstrating that the vaccination trials over 4 years in the St Austell area were showing some very productive results, which I hope that the the Minister and her scientists will be prepared to have a look and a very close look at. Yes, of course, I'll be very pleased to do so. Yeah.
I'm very grateful to my friend who's making a speech who's benefiting from a huge amount of experience, and it's very helpful. I congratulate the 229 who signed the petition from my constituency. Would he agree with Keith Cutler, past president of the British Cattle Veterinary Association, and my constituent, who have pointed out in academic papers on the basis of team science that the DEFRA testing is really not up to standard, and there needs to be a far better testing regime. With better testing could come better monitoring, better control, preventing the cattle-to-cattle transmission, which, as we've heard, is the greatest proportion of transmission.
Well, my old friend is of course correct in this regard. Certainly the testing regime is something which has been hotly debated and indeed not just debated, but also successive government ministers and scientists have promised progress in this regard for many years. And indeed, going back to the Agricultural Select Committee in 1997, we were looking at the issue. We also looked at the benefits of shifting from the tuberculin skin test to the gamma interferon test, which I think still that occasionally the gamma interferon is often used. It's a much more sensitive test. It produces many more false positives, which perhaps one might argue is a good thing, and fewer false negatives, which perhaps if one is wanting to kind of have a baseline of clean cattle, one might be using it. But it adds to the complexity. I mean, none of it is perfect, of course, but perhaps the minister might address the issue of the testing regimes which the government might be prepared to consider in order to get on top of the disease. I have a range of questions which I'd like to ask the minister, which is the first being in relation to the tuberculin test and the gamma interferon. The other is I remember back in 1987 there was a lot of talk in those days of the DIVA test, which has been referred to already, to differentiate between infected and vaccinated cattle, which clearly would be a golden bullet, which would be enormously helpful to the industry, because clearly, until you get across that particular line, a cattle vaccine, no matter how effective it may be, cannot be used because still you would not be able to sell cattle into the marketplace if you weren't able to undertake that differentiation test. And I remember in 1997 we were told that a DIVA test, an effective DIVA test, was up to 10 years away. This is 1997, and every time we've looked at it, it's always been 10 years away. And it simply rolls forward. And I would like to know from the minister, because we're going on many years, are we any closer now to securing a DIVA test? If we're going to be basing policy on vaccination, my next question is are there enough vaccinators, and have we got a mechanism by which we can create more? Because my understanding is that we've got nothing like enough people who have the license to undertake vaccination at present, and that certainly when we were rolling out the community-led badger vaccination trial in my own constituency all those years ago, we were aware of the fact that we were fortunate in having a number of people available then, but we knew at the time that if any of them were to fall ill, we would be struggling to actually undertake the continuation of the work. So clearly there needs to be significant investment in training. It's not something that can simply be created overnight. I mean, maybe you can bring in a lot of vets, but that's an expensive way of doing it. And maybe the minister would like to advise on that. The GATCOM, my old friend's constituency, a case has been referred to on many occasions, so I won't refer to that. But I just wonder whether the government actually has taken a view in relation to the GATCOM trials and what has been identified there. And can the minister tell us, are we actually just on the cusp of the end of the culling at present? Because my understanding is that I don't think any new licenses are likely to be granted And then on that basis, on the basis of the licences which have been granted, is it reasonable to say that this winter will be the last winter of any culling at all? Because there was a lot of concern when the government announced its policy last year that there would be culling until the end of this Parliament. But it looks to me, maybe I'm wrong, but it looks to me as if culling is going to come to an end. Therefore, the rolling out of vaccine and cattle security and biosecurity measures needs to be brought forward as quickly as possible. Further, what lessons has the government learned from the Wales policy, from the Welsh policy, the Welsh Assembly policy so far? They've been ahead of England and Cornwall for some time as far as the rolling out of vaccine is concerned. And I'd just be interested whether in their conversations between the government departments that any lessons have been learned there. Similarly with Southern Ireland, which actually was undertaking a widespread cull policy, which it stopped. But what lessons have been learned in there? Because I don't know, and I just wonder whether the government are fully aware. But on that basis, Mr. Stewart, I'm very grateful. Thank you for allowing me to make this contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd also like to thank the member for Ayrshire and Arran for introducing this debate so well. And she mentioned biosecurity. This is a very important topic, not least to the campaigners who have met with me in Worcester and to whom I'm grateful for their time, and the 183 people in Worcester who signed this petition about badger culling. This is also very important to our local farmers, and I'd like to take a moment to pay tribute to our well-loved Bennetts, who create excellent ice cream. I encourage anybody to come to Worcester and test it, who have also been very generous and accommodating with their time in educating me around the issues that they are facing. I'd like to focus on one specific aspect of the problem, which is around testing. And as an engineer, I've been surprised and quite shocked by the situation that we're in, that seems like we are trying to navigate a catch-22 situation. Because testing that is available, relatively rapid and relatively low cost, is too sensitive. And that means that we're faced with a false choice, because we cannot pick out an animal that is immunised from an animal that has an active infection. And that leaves farmers with an impossible choice, either to immunise to try and prevent infection, but then find themselves unable to early detect or respond to and manage an infection, or, of course, to rely on testing alone and just wait for the inevitable outcome. With no preventative measures in place, they know an infection will come, they know an outbreak will come, and they'll be left trying to manage that and the losses associated. I would like to ask whether the Minister is aware of work and what work has been carried out to develop a low-cost blood sampling rapid lateral flow antibody test for bovine TB. It strikes me that a less sensitive, low-cost and rapid test that could be deployed at scale regularly by farmers could be a game changer. And I know other members in the room have said similarly. This seems to me like a relatively simple and technologically available solution, even though it may take some R&D. I'd like to point out that post-COVID, the landscape around our ability to develop vaccines and low-cost tests has changed. And similarly, that we are a government that has said that we will embrace agility and partnership and work with others to try and innovate and find new solutions to problems. I'd appreciate the Minister either explaining the work that the government has been doing and is doing in this area, or indeed to meet with me after this debate to discuss it further. To me, this seems like a vital step that will enable us to eliminate bovine TB and to end the need for any kind of culling. Thank you.
St Hume.
Mr Stewart, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I rise briefly to thank the 287 constituents in Scarborough and Whitby who signed this petition calling for an immediate end to the badger cull. In my constituency, we are lucky to have dedicated groups of volunteers, such as the North Riding Badger Group, who are committed to the protection of badgers, their sets and habitats in the Scarborough and Whitby area. As we've already heard in this debate, bovine tuberculosis, known as BTB, is a horrible disease with a devastating impact on cattle and farmers' livelihoods. However, in the past decade, over 230,000 badgers have been culled in efforts by the government and farmers to control BTB. Crucially, efforts to eradicate BTB must also protect the welfare of badgers. I appreciate the government is working on a comprehensive new strategy to eradicate BTB, which will end the badger cull by the end of this Parliament. And I welcome government efforts in exploring alternative ways of combating BTB, such as by boosting cattle testing and developing a cattle vaccine against bovine TB. But can we really justify another 4 years of badger culling? The evidence for its impact on BTB is weak at best, and persisting with this approach not only damages public confidence, but also stalls progress towards more ethical and effective alternatives. I'd be grateful if the Minister could outline what steps the government is taking to accelerate the rollout of vaccination programmes as a long-term and humane solution to bovine TB.
I come to Tim McFerrin.
Stuart, it's a pleasure to serve under your guidance this afternoon, as always. Also, a massive thank you to the Honourable Member for Ayrshire and Arran, who introduced the debate so eloquently, and to the more than 102,000 and counting, I think, people who signed the petition, 239 of whom live in Westmoreland and Lonsdale. We are a constituency with lots of skin in the game, so to speak. I'm the MP for Tommy Brock, the badger of Beatrix Potter fame, and indeed the member for a large number of the farms which are dear to Beatrix Potter's heart, many of which I have to say have been devastated by the threat of bovine TB over the last few years. This is a subject that goes to the heart of two great passions, I think, from most of us in this room, and that is the welfare of our animals, both wildlife and livestock, and the future of our farming communities. Bovine TB is a serious issue. It's had a devastating impact on farmers emotionally and financially. It is an ongoing animal welfare emergency, causing huge numbers of livestock to suffer and die. In just the single year, June 24 to June 25, over 21,000 cattle were slaughtered in England alone because of TB, and we know over the 12-year period in question that over 200,000, close to 250,000 badgers have been culled. So I wonder whether we can start, Mr. Stewart, from a point of agreement. We all want to eradicate bovine TB. The question is how. How do we do it in a way that is humane, proportionate and grounded in science? It's interesting to note that the government is committed now to ending badger culling by the end of this Parliament, by 2029 specifically. Yet at the same time, Part 6 of the government's Planning and Infrastructure Bill includes provision for the killing of badgers if it means that they get in the way of housing development. My honourable friend, the member for Taunton and Wellington, well, go on, you make my point for you, for me even.
My honourable friend makes a really important point that we've been debating today badger culling to control TB. I believe badger culling should be phased out as quickly as possible. But the Planning and Infrastructure Bill actually provides for the killing of badgers, not to control TB, not for public health purposes, but for what is general public purposes. And I'd really ask the government to look again at why that is justified. Why do we need additional legislation to kill badgers?
Stuart, I did not give my honourable friend any warning whatsoever, so thank him for his eloquent, immediate sort of springing to his feet on this issue, which he cares about deeply, and so do I. Isn't it ludicrous, Mr. Stewart, to be outlawing the culling of badgers for scientific purposes to try to reduce spread of a dangerous disease, and yet permit it if developers want it? That seems outrageous and certainly lacking any kind of scientific underpinning. Farmers and rural communities and all of us who care about animal welfare wherever we live, we deserve a clear evidence-based plan from DEFRA that sets out how England will achieve TB-free status by 2038 with milestones, accountability and fair support, including very, very fair compensation for those on the front line. The lack of direction since the Godfrey Review in 2018, under both the government in power now and the Conservative one that preceded it, the lack of that clear direction has increased and created uncertainty and frustration right across the industry. As Liberal Democrats, we're calling on government to publish transparent, science-led evaluation of all disease control measures, including cost-benefit analyses, vaccination data and surveillance outcomes to ensure every action taken is effective, humane and sustainable. Now, I want to echo some of the wise words of my honourable friend, the member for St Ives, when I say that we believe very much that the way forward must be safe, effective and firmly rooted in evidence. And running the risk, Mr Stewart, of attempting to be reasonable on all this, a Liberal Democrat trait, is that the evidence is mixed on the science. It really is. I remember some time ago, to show my own long-standing, that the last but one Labour DEFRA secretary, the Right Honourable Member for Leeds Central, who is a good and decent man, I ought to say, I remember him being at the NFU conference back in 2009, when he was pressed by farmers as to why he wouldn't support even a limited form of badger cull, and his answer at the time was, well, we would, but public opinion wouldn't let us. And I want to say that it's really important that we make evidence-based decisions. That was maybe very honest of the man, the Right Honourable Gentleman, but it underpinned what is often the problem with democratic governments, is that we sometimes make wrong decisions because we don't think we'll get away with the right ones. This current DEFRA Department's review, published in August this year, found that culling may reduce infection quickly in some high-density and high-risk populations. There's a big but coming, and it's this, that badger vaccination delivers a more consistent reduction in TB prevalence across both the core and surrounding buffer zone, if delivered properly. That's a massive if, isn't it? Farms and farmers lack trust in the vaccination plan because they lack trust in this government, in their posture towards farmers and farming in general. So clearly, vaccination would be the way forward, but we can understand, surely can't we, why farmers lack trust in a government that has damaged them through the inheritance tax changes, through the family farm tax, botched the rollout of sustainable farming incentives, had open and shut windows for the likes of stewardship schemes and what have you. This is not a government that farmers currently trust. And so the difficulty of rolling out a vaccination programme against that lack of trust is massively scaled up. And the government, I'll be delighted to give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and for raising one of the most important voices, I think, that's often lost in this debate, which is the huge and enormous toll that this process has on our farming community, whether it be through the constant culling or, more accurately, through the constant cycle of testing. It's hugely expensive for farmers, many of whom were petition signers in West Dorset, saying, you know, I would forego the ability to sell my livestock if it meant I no longer had to keep going through the cost of repeated cycles of testing. And actually, we need to find a solution, whether it be through vaccination or anything else, that actually preserves the rights of farmers to make a living.
I completely agree with my honourable friend, and I think one of the reasons why there is that suspicion is because farmers know vaccination isn't simple. It might be the most effective form of dealing with the disease if it is rolled out properly, but it is logistically challenging, resource intensive, and it's why in the Liberal Democrats we are urging the government to invest heavily in improving delivery, to fund more research on how vaccination can be scaled and to work with conservationists and farmers to make it viable on the ground. And it has to go hand in hand England, with the government keeping its promises on investment, in particular into the Weybridge HQ of the Animal Plant and Health Agency. When you've got threats to, well, not just with bovine tuberculosis, but also blue tongue, avian influenza, the constant threat, all of those who were experiencing it at the time, in particular, feel this, of a return of foot and mouth. The failure to invest by either this government or its predecessor in APHA properly leaves us open and at risk, and it again leaves farmers deeply suspicious about the government's way forward. We also need better surveillance. The same DEFRA review that I mentioned a moment ago recommended more systematic monitoring, including routine testing of found dead badgers, so that we can map TB hotspots accurately and target control measures effectively. We talk about non-lethal ways of dealing with the disease. Again, I reiterate 21,586 cattle slaughtered last year because of bovine TB. That is not a non-lethal way of dealing with the disease. Now, there was a decline of around 42% over the previous 7 years, but recent data suggests that that welcome reduction in new cases may now be plateauing, and it's vital that we renew our efforts with the strategy that is both effective and humane. So, Mr. Stewart, I am moved by the animal welfare cost of this terrible scandal, this terrible threat that we face and have faced for many, many years. But I'm also moved by the human cost, as has been indicated by others as well. The farmers who deal with this issue, not just those whose herds get infected, but those who live with a constant threat, and not just financially impacted by this, they are deeply emotionally impacted at the worst possible time. The backdrop to this situation is the anxiety amongst our farming community, again because of the threat of the family farm tax coming in on the 1st of April next year, driving many to the depths of despair. At the same time, for the first time since 1945, we no longer have a readily available farm payment scheme. And which is an absolute outrage. It's a result of the last government's botched introduction of the new scheme, but this government has ramped it up and made things worse. What do I mean by that? The Sustainable Farming Incentive closed overnight early this year in March, not likely to be reopened again until maybe this time next year if they can get the computer system to work properly. You've got stewardship schemes ending, mid-tier stewardship schemes ending just in a few weeks' time. The new stewardship schemes open and then shut, open and then shut. Grant schemes open and then shut. And who gets into those schemes? The big guys who've got the resources to be there with their finger on the mouse to be able to bid when that moment arises. And the small family farmers, the ones who are best at animal welfare, by the way, they're the ones who are locked out on the outside. So as we talk about the threat to family farming, to animal welfare, and to the mental health of our farmers, we cannot look at bovine tuberculosis on its own. It's against the backdrop of a systematic, whether it's intended or accidental, annihilation of family farming in this country. And I hear politicians of all political colours saying that British farming is the best in the world. They're right, but rarely do they know why they are right. They are right because of the culture of family farming in this country. And family farming means close attention to detail, to husbandry, to animal welfare, to environmental standards, to food standards. And that is why, in tackling bovine tuberculosis, this government needs to have a plan that wins the trust of farmers and of those who care about animals, but also underpins the essential future to our country of small family farms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart, and it's a great pleasure to serve today under your chairmanship. May I first of all declare my professional and personal interest as a veterinary surgeon and as a fellow of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. Can I first of all thank my honourable friend, the member for North Ayrshire and Arran, for her thoughtful opening to this debate on behalf of the Petitions Committee. I have a huge amount of respect and admiration for her as a passionate advocate and champion for animal welfare. I'd also like to thank the 102,458 signatories to this petition, including the 143 from my constituency of Epping Forest. We've heard many contributions from across the House today talking about many of the sort of toolbox elements, the tools in the toolbox for tackling bovine tuberculosis. We've had contributions from members from Glastonbury and Somerton, Stourbridge, York Central, Camborne and Redruth, St Ives, Worcester and Scarborough and Whitby. And Some of the key elements that came out in some of the presentations were the mental health impacts of this disease, and I'm going to touch on some of that later on in my presentation. But also, some of the presentations very much talked about different aspects of the tools that are currently available to us and are being developed in terms of us tackling the disease, and that no particular tool is perfect, but in a combination of tools in the toolbox is something that we need to be looking at moving forward. I think, Mr. Stewart, we can all agree, and as we have heard, bovine tuberculosis has devastating consequences. And at present, there is no single method that in isolation that is perfect in terms of combating it. Now, during the course of this debate, it has been encouraging to hear colleagues from across the House reiterate, I think, the fundamental key aim that we all want to eradicate bovine TB. This aim is what should unite all stakeholders, including farmers, animal welfare groups, scientists and veterinarians. And very much coming loud and clear through this debate is the importance of animal welfare and the animal welfare of the cattle and also the badgers in this as well. As we've heard, there's various different numbers as to the number of cattle that are slaughtered, but many, many thousands of cattle are slaughtered each year in the UK as part of an effort to eradicate this awful disease. And equally so, different levels of cost, but it's estimated around £150 million per year costing to the UK taxpayer, with additional costs falling on the cattle sector itself. Bovine TB takes a terrible toll on farmers, leading to the loss of highly prized animals and, in the worst cases, entire valued herds. It has devastating impacts on farming businesses up and down the land, and as we have heard from across the House today, it has significant effects on the mental health of everyone involved. Now, in the last parliamentary session, on the EFRAS Select Committee, when I was a member of that committee, I triggered an inquiry and report on rural mental health. Some of the most powerful evidence we took in that inquiry was from the veterinary and farming sectors about the mental health impacts on farmers and other workers, including vets, from bovine TB. The stress and anxiety around the testing of a herd and the trauma and consequence of positive reactors in a herd and the implications and the outcomes of infection in a herd are absolutely devastating. We cannot, Mr. Stewart, overstate enough the loss of animal life and the human emotional impact of infectious diseases and outbreaks in farming. Now, my experiences as a veterinary surgeon in the foot and mouth crisis in 2001 are a huge part of my journey into this place as a Member of Parliament. Now, I saw sights then that I never want to see again in my lifetime. Now, bovine TB is a very complicated situation with complex epidemiology that I am afraid does still very much implicate the role of wildlife reservoirs such as badgers in the spread of the disease. The disease can be spread between cattle, from cattle to people, and it's important we must realise it is a zoonotic disease, and also between cattle and badgers. Now, the latter transmission can be from cow to badger and vice versa. The review for government by Godfrey in 2018 and then updated in August of this year clearly states that there is transmission to and from badgers and cattle, and that the presence of infected badgers poses a threat to cattle herds. The Godfrey review also emphasised the impact the disease has on the welfare and the well-being of farmers and their families, a discussion that we've heard about today. In October of 2023, NFU Cymru released the results of a survey that they conducted, which found that of the 507 farmers who had completed the survey, 85% said that bovine TB had negatively impacted their own mental health or the mental health of someone in their family. Over 93% said that they were extremely concerned or very concerned about bovine TB. Now, the 2025 update to the Godfrey Review also took time to stress the significant research undertaken on bovine TB and its mental health impacts, and recommended that those dealing directly with farmers in a regulatory or advisory capacity received basic mental health first aid and suicide awareness training. I strongly support this finding, and I very much urge the government to work to implement this recommendation as soon as possible, in addition to the other similar recommendations that we made in our EFRA report on rural mental health. As we have heard today, there are significant challenges with the testing for and for the diagnosis of bovine tuberculosis. Testing is so important, and more work is needed on the optimal tests for the disease, taking into consideration both sensitivity and specificity. There is a debate about the strengths and weaknesses of the currently used single intradermal comparative cervical tuberculin, or SICCT test. And Godfrey talks about the move to the more sensitive single intradermal cervical tuberculin, or SICT test. Indeed, the British Veterinary Association also talks about the potential rolling out of the interferon gamma test as a supplement to the SICCT. So, these diagnostic tests are just one of the tools in our toolbox to control and eradicate bovine TB. Now, during the tenure of the previous Conservative government, in a major scientific breakthrough, the Animal and Plant Health Agency developed a companion candidate test to detect infections amongst vaccinated animals, the so-called DIVA test, to differentiate a vaccinated animal from a naturally infected one. And the Honourable Member for St Ives spoke about this test. Now, that major breakthrough was brought to us closer to being able to strategically vaccinate cattle in England against this insidious disease. But as we have heard, we are not quite there yet with this test. Now, I urge the government and the minister, this must remain a huge and urgent priority. And I hope that the minister can update us on the progress of the field trials and rollout of this vital tool in our toolbox. Now, the previous government drove forward an ambitious strategy to eradicate bovine TB in England by 2038. This strategy set out a range of evidence-led interventions to tackle the disease in both cattle and wildlife, including strengthening cattle testing and movement controls, introducing new help for herd owners to improve biosecurity measures on farms, and to help manage down the risk of bringing the disease into their herds and supporting the deployment of badger vaccination. I cannot stress enough how important biosecurity measures are in the control of this disease, as we have heard today in terms of many infectious diseases. And this, again, has been emphasised by the Godfrey Review and indeed the British Veterinary Association. I cannot pass the biosecurity word without stressing that this is another clear demonstration of how crucial it is that our biosecurity is firing on all cylinders. And our Animal and Plant Health Agency, the APHA, is fully equipped as the forefront of the UK's fight against animal disease outbreaks and their potentially devastating consequences. After no fewer than 17 times of me in this Parliament asking and pressing the government to fully fund the redevelopment of the Animal and Plant Health Agency's HQ in Weybridge, I am relieved that the government's national security strategy did commit £1 billion to do so, and I welcome this major commitment from the government, continuing on the work on this started by the previous Conservative government. But this, combined with the £1.2 billion provided by the previous Conservative government in 2020, still leaves us with a shortfall of £400 million from the total £2.8 billion in the National Audit Office has outlined is required. Current plans mean that the redevelopment will not be complete until 2034, with interim laboratories not in place until 2027-28. Now, the 2025 update of the Godfrey Review explicitly concludes that a lack of investment in the APHA and DEFRA more widely is still limiting our control of bovine TB. So this needs to be addressed with urgency. Our wider short-term biosecurity is equally vulnerable, as outlined by alarming findings of 2 new reports this year by the EFRA Select Committee. In the Biosecurity at the Border, Britain's Illegal Meat Crisis report, it was found that illegal meat imports have soared from 164 tonnes being seized in 2023 to 235 tonnes in 2024. And actually, if you think about the amount that we are not detecting, it is a frightening statistic. And meat being handled in poor sanitary conditions is already creeping through into our food chain. Like with bovine TB, the EFRA Committee's reports note that a key part of this problem is a lack of resourcing strategically by DEFRA, such as DEFRA currently only funding 20% of the Dover Port Authority's operational coverage, which is only made worse by poor data collection and sharing at present. All of this amidst a worrying backdrop of worldwide context for biosecurity. Foot and mouth disease outbreaks this year in Germany, Hungary and Slovakia, African swine fever spreading across the European continent, and avian influenza and blue tongue virus, and as we are talking about today, bovine TB, very much with us in the United Kingdom. These are critical and grave threats that cannot afford any complacency at all by any government of any political colour. So I really urge the government to carry on really focusing on biosecurity. I shudder to think of the consequences if this situation is not improved as a matter of urgency. I would be grateful if the Minister, in her summing up, could outline what the government is doing about the biosecurity situation in her response. Now, we've heard about vaccination in cattle today, and another vital tool in the toolbox is vaccination of cattle against TB. Now, at present, cattle are starting to be vaccinated with the cattle BCG vaccine, which is based on the human vaccine BCG, a weakened strain which does not cause disease. However, the BCG does not give 100% protection against the disease. So on its own, that particular tool is not the silver bullet. It needs to be used in combination. Now, as Godfrey states, the development of a successful BCG Diva product is still not there and still not guaranteed. So we really need to make sure that that is scaled up and rolled out at pace. So therefore, cattle vaccination should not be considered the end result, but instead complementary to a comprehensive testing and surveillance programme. And it's also important to highlight efforts to vaccinate the wild badger population. Practically, this is, as one can imagine, a much more difficult job to vaccinating cattle. As Godfrey states, the vaccination of badgers can help, but it may take over a decade based on current approaches. The government launched a national badger population survey in February, and I understand that further surveying is scheduled to resume later this year to estimate badger abundance and population recovery. And I'd be grateful if the Minister could clarify when the results of these surveys will be published. The last government supported efforts to control the spread of the disease, and a new version of the E-petition mapping tool was launched, which is enabling farmers to access information on TB-free farms and facilitate safer trading. Unfortunately, this year's update of the original Godfrey Review has concluded that there is only a small chance of meeting the target without a step change in urgency with which the issue is treated and the resources devoted to eradication. We sadly again are being warned when it comes to animal welfare that a lack of resourcing is an obstacle to doing what we need, and this must change. Strategies moving forward to eradicate the disease must focus on vaccination. However, until this can be done at the speed and scale required, other control methods are still required. This includes the use of culling in the wildlife reservoir population of badgers, which has been shown to be an effective method at controlling the spread of the disease. And we've had debate about that today. Part of ensuring that the use of culling is being undertaken as necessary is to ensure that behind alternative tools such as vaccination, we have the necessary body of evidence that gives us the clearest possible picture of their effectiveness, their strengths, and indeed their limitations. The National Farmers Union and the British Veterinary Association have emphasised the need for this evidence, particularly when it comes to the use of vaccination and its impact on herd incidence. Doing so can benefit not only how it could be used as a potential exit strategy or stop disease spreading into new areas, but also give confidence to farmers that alternatives to badger culling can be effective and support those with livestock at risk of bovine TB to be motivated to take part in government measures, particularly in light of the fact that the government announced, as we've talked about today, that it intends to end the badger cull by the end of this current Parliament. Now, when it comes to information collection and sharing, the Godfrey Review and the National Audit Office have both stressed the disappointing progress made with the Livestock Information Transformation Programme that drives livestock traceability. The Godfrey Report's updated publication this year found that speeding up progress with this is absolutely essential if eradicating bovine TB by 2038 is to be achieved. The National Farmers Union note that this has a huge opportunity for the industry to unlock a wealth of additional information, and I urge the government to look at this aspect and how its benefits can be unlocked as soon as possible in the essential task of data gathering. I should say, however, that the Labour government's ending of the badger cull does seem a high-stakes gamble and does not appear to follow all of the science or the evidence. For example, the Downs et al. 2019 study published found that after 4 years of culling, there were reductions in TB incidence rates in cattle herds of 66% in Gloucestershire and 37% in Somerset relative to comparison areas. Birch et al. In 2024 found that in a study from 2013 to 2020, the herd incidence rate of TB decreased by 56% up to the 4th year of a badger control policy interventions. I will give way.
I'm repeating myself, but he has to understand that those research papers were questioned heavily, I have to say, on the basis that during that time period over which those statistics were gathered, it wasn't based on the same baseline nor the same system by which they were testing the cattle at the time. So therefore, you weren't comparing like with like, and it was very heavily questioned at the time, and it was never satisfactorily resolved.
Intervention, I would respectfully disagree. The Birch et al. Study of 2024 looks at this in depth. And yes, you can look at some of these scientific studies, and indeed some of the scientific studies that criticise the badger cull. Then the government DEFRA scientific officer and the chief veterinary officer queried the statistical methodology of some of those studies. So we can have a long debate about some of the methodology in some of these papers, but Godfrey himself and the expert panel that was reconvened by the new government actually has looked at a lot of the evidence and actually still shows that there is a role in some way for some of the badger control. So I hear what he's saying, but I'll carry on if I may. So the previous government was clear that it did not want to, or indeed intend to, continue badger control indefinitely. No one wants to keep going with this forever. But however, until all the tools in the toolbox are fully developed, and we've heard today about many of those tools, and they're not all there yet, we still, sadly, our view on this side of the House, in His Majesty's opposition, is that badger control still needs to be kept in that toolbox until all the tools are really up to speed. So sadly, we would have to say that we would need to keep that in there. And I know that that will disappoint many of the stakeholders who are watching this debate today, many of the people in the public gallery as well. But as we've heard today, we have to try and be dispassionate and actually try and follow the science. One of the key take-homes from the Godfrey Review as well was that the polarisation of the role of the wildlife reservoir and the badger in this debate, and the fact that it has split people and it's one view or another, has made it very difficult for everyone to actually analyse what the exact risk is and what is the best control mechanism from there. So, the British Veterinary Association state that badger culling, when it's deployed, should be deployed in a targeted, effective and humane manner only where cull design is based on the best available evidence and mitigates against what we've heard a little bit about today, the perturbation effect. The National Farmers Union state that to effectively tackle this disease and combat transmission through all routes, we must retain access to all tools with their implementation driven by science and evidence. And more widely, on rural issues, sadly, this Labour government has already shown us that they sometimes don't follow the evidence or the data when it comes to policy decisions for farming and rural communities. Just look at their retrograde approach to taxation on farms, ignoring the devastation that the family farm tax will have on the very livelihood and survival of rural businesses, choosing to add to pressure facing farmers' pockets, livelihoods and well-being, rather than providing them with the support that they need. I really urge, and we've heard this from across the House, that they reverse that policy as a matter of urgency in terms of giving clarity to farmers moving forward and abolish the family farm tax. I hope they don't make another error by losing the progress that has been made since 2014 in the control of bovine TB. That if we take a quick decision, not looking at all the science and looking at all the evidence, we might take backward steps that are going to have significant impacts on our rural communities. At present, we need all of the tools to remain in the bovine TB control toolbox. Biosecurity measures, better diagnostic testing, cattle vaccination, badger vaccination, rollout of the DIVA test, and also targeted control of the wildlife reservoir. To reiterate and conclude, His Majesty's official opposition believes that targeted, humane and evidence-based badger control should remain a measure, not forever, but so long as the evidence says that it needs to stay in place. And it is an available part of the toolbox, alongside others, to control the spread of the devastating disease that is bovine TB. The previous government set out its ambition to eradicate this disease by 2038, and it's important to highlight the current government has not changed that year of a target. We should follow the science, the evidence and the data for the sake of our cattle sector and our rural communities, and indeed rural mental health.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart, and it's a great pleasure to be serving under your watchful eye in Westminster Hall on this first evening back. And I want to begin by acknowledging the strength of feeling in this debate, including from 170 of my own constituents in Wallasey, and amongst the thousands, the 102,000 odd members of the public who signed the petition. For many, the idea of culling badgers, a protected species, is deeply upsetting and even unconscionable, and I understand and respect that view. As many have said, this is a totemic and polarising issue. The fact is that over successive years, hundreds of thousands of badgers have been culled indiscriminately across a vast area, stretching from Cornwall to Cheshire and across to the Midlands. For these valid reasons, many, including in the Labour manifesto, have described this policy as ineffective. And I want to be clear from the outset, this government is committed to ending the badger cull. It stands by that commitment, and today I say again the badger cull is ending. We've already taken decisive steps to bring the cull to its closure. Bovine TB has a devastating impact on our farming community, and we have heard from all sides of the House about this in great detail. It's cost the lives of more than 174,000 cattle who've been compulsorily slaughtered in England because of the disease. It costs the taxpayer over £100 million a year, and it costs farmers dearly in lost income, extra business costs, and we've heard the stress and mental health problems that waiting for those constant tests have subjected many families to. Far too many farmers have suffered profound stress and hardship as a result of all of this. They live with a constant anxiety of regular testing, the financial strain of movement restrictions, and the heartbreak of losing affected animals, often reared with care and pride over generations. In the year up to June 2025, more than 21,000 cattle were slaughtered in England for bovine TB control. That's fewer than the year before, but for any farmer who's had to watch one of their animals taken away, that would be little consolation. Since 2013, over 247,000 badgers have been culled under licence, and that's a very large figure, and it's a hard figure to hear. So our challenge in these difficult balancing acts is to strike the right balance, tackling bovine TB with urgency whilst protecting our wildlife. The government's committed to moving decisively towards a future free from this devastating disease, and to do so in a way which is both effective and earns the trust of the communities most affected. The petition calls for an immediate end to the badger cull and a stronger focus on cattle-based measures. I want to respond to that clearly because I understand, and what we've heard here today, how deeply people care about the issue. This debate comes at an important moment, perhaps slightly too early, I have to say, but the petitioners are the petitioners, and we get the debates when we get them. But we're refreshing the bovine TB eradication strategy introduced by our predecessors in 2014, and it was they who instigated this cull. A new strategy is currently being co-designed with farmers, vets, scientists, conservationists and the government, all of whom will have a voice, trying to deal with some of the polarisation of the debate. It'll be informed by independent evidence in a review led by Professor Sir Charles Godfrey, and we've got, it's been referred to on several occasions, the update to that review, which was published on the 4th of September this year. First, on the role of badgers, the petition argues that wildlife are being scapegoated. I understand the use of the word, but we must be clear, transmission does run both ways, within species and between cattle and badgers. This has been demonstrated repeatedly by using modern technology such as whole genome sequencing. And so we have to have an honest debate, and in order to have an effective policy, we have to recognise the reality that the TB infections go both ways, from one species to another and back again. The government's direction of travel, though, is clear. We are investing in non-lethal interventions and cattle-focused measures, including non-lethal for badgers, that is, I have to say, including both cattle and badger vaccinations. To end the badger cull by the end of the Parliament. The most sustainable way to protect farms and wildlife is by investing in measures to reduce infection in both species, such as badger and cattle vaccination. Now, Sir Charles Godfrey's evidence review concluded that the overall package of interventions, that is cattle testing, movement controls, on-farm biosecurity alongside the badger cull policy, has contributed to reducing bovine TB in cattle. They also concluded, though, in the review that it's not statistically possible to isolate the impact of each individual measure. He said it was possible to have effective ways of controlling bovine TB with a badger cull and without a badger cull. And therefore we have to have a look to see how we can move forwards in the best possible way, but also given the manifesto commitment upon which we were elected last year. The petition And many voices in the debate argue that badger culling should stop immediately. They say it lacks solid scientific evidence behind it and it's gone on too long. It takes the focus away from tackling bovine TB in cattle. But really, however much one might sympathise with those views, it's not really about choosing between badgers or cattle. The real question is, how do we take these facts seriously and decide the best way to keep bearing down on bovine TB until we can finally get rid of it? So I'll say it again, the badger cull is ending. The 2025 season is now nearly over, and this is the final year of industry-led culling in England's high-risk and edge areas. And for those of us who might wish to have a little bit more information about that, at its height, the badger cull, there were 73 licences to cull badgers operating up and down the country. In this season, there are 21. By the end of this season, there will only be one remaining licensed cull. And that will continue until the end of the season, and then there'll be an analysis of it to see how effective it's been scientifically, and there'll be a decision made then about whether to continue with that final license or not. So, yes.
Just a small point, just in relation to that final point about the license that is being granted. Is that in a low risk area?
Yes, it is. It's to deal with a TB hotspot that appeared. There are no culls or licenses by the end of this season in any high intense area or edge area. So we all agree, and I think everybody has said this in their own particular ways, that we have to ensure that we reduce the incidence and eradicate bovine TB, and we also want to stop killing badgers. So we have to do more on cattle, and that is exactly what this government wishes to do. Cattle measures are the foundation of our eradication programme, and this means regular testing, both routine and targeted, by using the highly specific skin test, and when needed, to be supplemented where appropriate by the highly sensitive interferon gamma test. We also have robust rules on cattle movements, slaughterhouse surveillance, and tools like the IBTB map to help farmers make risk-based and informed decisions when buying or selling stock. But I believe more can be done to strengthen our cattle testing programme. The DEFRA-funded TB Advisory Service and the TB Hub are the go-to advisors in supporting farmers to implement practical biosecurity measures. Simple things like raising water troughs, securing feed stores, keeping wildlife out of buildings. These are simple, low-cost steps that make a real difference. Yet I recognise that Godfrey's panel, the view is that more must be done to strengthen biosecurity across the board, and so we will be focusing on what that might look like. One of the more exciting developments in the generation in cattle vaccination, the cattle BCG vaccine used alongside a new test that can tell the difference between vaccinated amongst infected animals, the so-called DIVA skin test, is literally being trialled on farms as we speak. If marketing authorisations are granted by the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, we could start using these tools in the next few years. Obviously, these things are annoyingly slow, and obviously I will also be looking to see what I can do to see if there's any way in the system that we've got that we can ensure a speedier ability to get those things used. Clearly, vaccination is never going to take off if one can't tell the difference between an infected or a vaccinated animal. And so it's clear that we have to make progress on that. I'm happy to.
I'm really grateful for all that my honourable friend has said, but I'm really minded at this moment about what Kate Bingham said when she was talking about the capability we had in responding to the pandemic and the scaling down and the scaling up of capability. Will she look at some of that methodology so that we are able to respond not only to this particular crisis, but as the Shadow Minister highlighted, to future risks which are facing farmers as well.
I'm well aware of the increased risk of disease and issues suddenly emerging, having lived through the last outbreak of foot and mouth in this country, not quite in the way that the Honourable Member opposite did. It can be catastrophic. And so it's very, very important to think about how we can be ready to scale surveillance up very, very quickly. However, and the Honourable Lady talked about this, my Honourable friend talked about this very much in her contribution, comparing the battle here against COVID, the battle that we all lived through a few years ago. Even though we'll have a long repayment method, money was no object then. I'm afraid that in this instance, finances and money does have to be an object, and it has to. We have to try to get our surveillance and our ability to respond quickly in as best place as we can within the resources that we have. And so there's more of a constraint, I might put it that way, than there might have been in some of the examples that she was using in her remarks earlier. Yes.
To the Minister for giving way, and very grateful for the very helpful remarks she's giving in relation to the DIVA test, which you say is being tested at present, and wonderful that it is. Does she not, though, nevertheless accept that just as in the pandemic it was possible to produce a vaccine, within relatively short time? I appreciate that civil servants seem to have a rather stretchy temporal language, but a few years isn't really kind of quite good enough. I mean, can she be more specific, given the fact that this is costing this country millions of pounds every year?
Specific when I've had more time to chase a few of the questions that I want to ask the appropriate people. But I will make the observation that COVID was a virus and we're not dealing with a virus. In this particular instance, this disease is very difficult to find and pursue and detect because of the way that it has evolved to evade detection, which is what these kinds of things tend to do. So it's not simple and easy, and one has to be quite careful trying to chivvy along medical regulators to ensure that things are safe, just so that I can make a convenient announcement to Parliament. We need to know they're safe and that they're effective, because as various people have said in this debate, if we were to unleash them and they were to be used with the government's imprimatur, with scientific imprimatur, we'd better be right about it, because otherwise we get in a situation where we can't tell whether cattle are vaccinated or infected. And once you're in that situation, you can't ever come back from it. So it's got to be done in a precautionary way, is what I'd say. But let's put it this way, I'm probably as frustrated as he is by the speed at which it's going, but it'll take as long as it has to take, with chivying at an appropriate level. To end the badger cull responsibly, we must continue to tackle TB in wildlife using tools that are backed by science. Badger vaccination is not about ignoring the role badgers play in spreading TB, and it's certainly not about blaming wildlife. It's about reducing infection within badger populations in an area where they pose a risk to cattle without resorting to culling a protected species. And as an aim, I think that's got to be something that we wish to pursue. And I'm told if one can vaccinate 30% of a badger population, that becomes effective at achieving the goals that we wish to achieve. Multiple studies show that vaccination is an effective way of controlling the disease in badgers, which is why we're scaling up at pace. In 2024, more than 4,000 badgers were vaccinated, and that capability will expand further with the introduction of a new badger vaccination field force next year, which will see us partnering with industry to deliver more vaccination areas. Alongside this, a new National Wildlife TB surveillance programme and an updated badger population survey are being put in place to ensure that this field force and other measures are deployed where they will make the greatest difference. When bovine TB hits a farm, it's not just an entry on a spreadsheet or a data point in national statistics. It means months of restrictions, mental strain, real financial jeopardy, and national numbers matter, but people live this day after day in the areas that are affected. That's why our strategy must be practical on the ground, understandable at the kitchen table, and above all effective. That's why we're co-designing it with those who face the devastating disease every day, ensuring that their experience and insight shape the solutions that we put in place. A steering group drawn from the existing Bovine TB Partnership for England is, as I speak, overseeing several expert working groups involving over 100 individuals. These groups are focused on governance, resourcing, cattle surveillance, breakdown testing, accelerating cattle vaccination, trade and movement, badgers and other wildlife, and how to respond to changing epidemiology. The plan is to present a new strategy next year, and in doing so we will deliver a step change, one that reflects the best available evidence, the lived experience of those affected, and a shared commitment for England to be bovine TB free by 2038. We will consolidate and strengthen cattle focus controls, testing, movement, biosecurity and advisory support. We will continue to advance the cattle vaccination programme at pace. We'll see quite how much pace means. Greater minds than me have talked about the relativity of time, but I want it to be as quickly as is safely possible. That way, when authorisations are in place, we can begin the rollout, because we're preparing for deployment so that we can go quickly as soon as we get the go-ahead. So we'll scale up badger vaccination across large contiguous areas, supported by enhanced wildlife TB surveillance. And this is how we'll end the badger cull, by building the capabilities and viable alternatives that make culling less necessary. And we should not underestimate the challenge, though. The nature of the disease means that the strategy must remain flexible, adapting to the disease picture as that too evolves. The petitioners who have had this debate happen today want a cattle-centred approach. Farmers want certainty, fairness and access to all tools that work on their farms. Scientists want us to follow the evidence wherever it leads. The strategy refresh is our chance to knit those threads into a durable plan to ensure that we achieve bovine TB-free status in England by 2038. The government will end the badger cull by the end of this Parliament. Will replace it safely and credibly with vaccination, strengthened surveillance, better biosecurity, and crucially, we hope a cattle vaccine and a DIVA test that can build resilience into the herds. That's how we will reduce disease, costs and stress, how we protect a much-loved native species, and how we restore hope to farming families who've lived too long under the shadow of bovine TB. Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
Irene Campbell to wind up.
I'd like to thank all members and the Minister for their contributions and what has been a very interesting debate on a very important issue. We've heard about the importance of biosecurity, testing regimes, finding an effective vaccine, the effect this can have on farmers, both financially and emotionally, differing scientific views. I think for me, the one message is we do need to move as quickly as we possibly can, because over the years, so many innocent animals have needlessly lost their lives because of bovine tuberculosis. And I'm looking forward to an end, obviously, to the badger cull to come sooner rather than later. The UK is often referred to as a world leader in animal welfare, and this new Labour government has an opportunity to strengthen our standing. I'm looking forward to the release of the animal welfare strategy and the implementation of the bovine tuberculosis strategy that will end the cull. I'd like to thank Robert Pownall, the creator of the petition, and his colleague Tom Langton at Protect the Wild for meeting with me and to congratulate them on gathering over 102,000 signatures. Yeah. I would also like to thank Sir Charles Godfrey, the director of the Oxford Martin School, Ellie Ward at Wildlife and Countryside Link, and Niamh McGinty, Tory Morgan and Marianne Combe at the National Farmers Union for meeting with me in preparation for this debate. And finally, I would like to thank the staff from the Petitions Committee for their invaluable hard work and the support they gave me preparing for this debate.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 700317 relating to bovine tuberculosis control and badger culling. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order. Order. The sitting stands adjourned.